Hey y'all, welcome back to Most of It. As I said recently, some of my friends have been getting into 40K, and so I've been introducing them to all the aspects of the hobby. Well, the other day we were talking about books, and I remembered how tricky it can be to navigate all the series in the 40K setting. I was taken back to when I was first getting into the hobby, and I literally typed in Warhammer 40K Book 1 into Google. I was so naive. And so here I am today to lay it out for everyone and give some recommendations. Of course, I haven't read every book on this list, so for those ones, I'll be going off what seems to be the consensus surrounding them. So without further ado, let's get into this. Alright, so to start, 40k doesn't have a book 1 to just read through all the events of the setting, so you have to find events you're interested in and read about them specifically. And as far as actually finding these books, they're pretty much all available on Audible, so that's how most read them. If you want to get them physically, then unfortunately it's going to be kind of tricky, as GW is not very good about maintaining physical stock outside of a few heavy hitters. The most obvious example, and the first series on this list, is the Horus Heresy. To cut it off at the pass, if you're not interested in Space Marines, this is not the series for you. But it is a great series for beginners, as, let's face it, Marines are just the most approachable faction in the setting. This series takes place in the 30,000s, near the end of the Great Crusade. The Primarchs have all been found, and humanity has conquered a good bit of the galaxy, and with all that, the Emperor decides to return to Terra and leave his son Horus in charge of the remaining Crusade efforts. Horus, however, falls to the Dark Gods and begins one of the largest events in Imperial history, the Horus Heresy. Together with his other traitorous brothers, he assails the Imperium, with the Loyalists being caught off guard and having to scramble for survival, lest they be overrun and destroyed by the Dark God's puppet, with Horus all the while having his eyes set on Terra in a final duel with his father, the Emperor. That's a very condensed, spoiler-free plot summary for you. The Horus Heresy is my personal favorite series from Warhammer, with a lot of books about varied groups and events with a lot of different writers. There are also some of the best books from Warhammer, and I believe it's also the longest 40k series with over 60 books. But that can be pretty daunting when you're first getting into it, but never fear, because I am here to give you a reading order. So some will say to just grab the first book and read in numerical order. I disagree with this. It's cumbersome, and some of the books just aren't that important. Don't get me wrong, if you want to do that, go for it, but it's not my recommendation. Instead, what you should do is read the first 5 books to start. Number 1 is Horus Rising, and it's a great book to establish the setting and characters. You get to know the Space Marines and the Primarchs, and you get to see Horus before it all goes to pot. Book 2 is False Gods, and this is a great ramp up as you see things slowly begin to line up into a result that's really interesting to read about. Book 3 is Galaxy in Flames, and it's a culmination of the past 2 as Horus unleashes his treachery on the world of Isfahan III. Book 4 is Flight of the Eisenstein, and it details Nathaniel Garrow as he runs to Terra to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal. And Book 5 is Fulgrim, and it's a great account of the fall of the Emperor's children, culminating in the Battle of Isfahan V, with one of the most tragic events in the Imperium's history. These 5 books will give you a great launch point into the rest of the series, and best of all, they're all fantastic reads and are still some of my favorites in the series. But where do you go from here? Well, this is where things get a little more complicated, as from here on out you have stories following the different legions as they grapple with the traitors, and you kind of have to pick and choose what you read. So if you're new and don't know what groups you're into, you may want to go watch my recent video where I explain all the factions in 40k, and find which one piques your interest. Come back to this video after you're done with that. Are you back? Great. Now that you have a legion that you like, or if you already had one you liked, I will direct you to CD8D's guide on Reddit. I know, it's kind of lazy of me, but it's the reading order I've used and I'm pretty happy with it. It lays out all the different legions and gives recommendations that are not only interesting, but chronologically accurate as well. So I'll have a link to that in the description if you're interested. Also, if you just want to read the whole story but not all of the books, you can just read the whole list and you'll have a pretty good understanding of the heresy. But if you're just looking to read some good books and don't really care about the overarching story, here's my personal recommendations. Still read the first 5 books, they're great, but from there read The First Heretic, Know No Fear, Betrayer, Vengeful Spirit, A Thousand Suns, Prospero Burns, The Master of Mankind, Wolfsbane, Scars, and Praetorian of Dorn. And from there, if you're interested, just read through the whole Siege of Terror series and you'll have the full story. These are my favorite books in the Horus Heresy, and they're all great reads with 2 standouts being Betrayer and Wolfsbane especially. But that's enough of the heresy. Let's move on to the modern era in the 40,000s. This time doesn't have a Horus Heresy-like series where you read it all and then you know the story, so you have to do a bit more jumping around. But if you want to know the story, I recommend reading the Dark Imperium trilogy, as it details the Plague Wars and some of the biggest moments in the recent lore are in them. Also, The Lion, Son of the Forest, where we see the return of Lionel Johnson, and I haven't read them yet, but it seems like the Dawn of Fire series are really the main books pushing the lore forward right now. For a more focused look into the more modern Space Marines, I'd recommend Space Wolf by William King, Hell's Reach, and Devastation of Baal, especially if you like the Wolves, Black Templars, and Blood Angels. But that's enough about the Space Marines. Let's move into the other aspects of the Imperium, like the Imperial Guard. The Guard has a lot of books, like a lot, and a lot of them are really good. Some recommendations are the Gaunt's Ghost and Caiaphas Cain series, especially Caiaphas if you want a funnier read, and I haven't personally read it yet, but Fall of Cadia from what I've heard is really good. Guard books are really good if you want a deeper look into the on-the-ground aspects of Imperial life, with stories like 15 Hours, which details how the expected lifespan of the average guardsman is about 15 hours, and it walks you through that time during a battle. For a more broad look at the Imperium, there's the Eisenhorn books, which follow an Inquisitor through all his adventures, and I haven't personally read it, but I've heard good things for the most part. If you like the Sisters of Battle, I've heard that Mark of Faith and Faith and Fire are both pretty good books, albeit a little outdated as far as lore goes. If you like the Mechanicus, there's the Forges of Mars series, Titanicus, and Belisarius Call the Great Work, and from what I've seen, they're all great reads. There's also the book Mechanicum from the Horus Heresy series, which I enjoyed a good bit. If you like the Custodes, there's the Watchers of the Throne series, and Master of Mankind from the Horus Heresy is also a fantastic read, and Valdor, Birth of the Imperium is a neat look into the fledgling Imperium right at the end of the Unification Wars as the Emperor prepares for the Great Crusade. If you like Grey Knights, I'd recommend The Emperor's Gift and the Nathaniel Garrow series if you want to learn about their origins. And if you're into Imperial Knights, Mechanicum from the Horus Heresy and Assassinorum Kingmaker are pretty good. But that's enough from the Corpse Worshippers. Let's get tradery up in here. If you lean more toward the trader aspect of 40k, then you have some great choices, my friend. Starting with probably my number one recommendation for the traders, the Night Lords trilogy. These books follow a group of Night Lords, and that's all I'm going to say because I don't want to spoil anything. If you like the Night Lords, there's also Prince of Crows from the Horus Heresy series, which gives a very interesting look into Sevatar. Death Guard has some of the best books out of the Trader Legions, like Flight of the Eisenstein and The Buried Dagger from the Horus Heresy series, and for the modern setting, they were involved in the Dark Imperium series, and Lords of Silence is one of the best 40k books out there. For World Eaters, most of their good books come from the Horus Heresy, as their modern ones are, from what I've seen, kinda mid. But I recommend Angron, Slave of Nuceria, and Betrayer, which is my favorite Warhammer book ever. For the Thousand Sons, the book A Thousand Sons from the Horus Heresy is excellent, and from what I've seen, the Armin series is pretty good too. For Emperor's Children, I'd recommend Fulgrim, Eidolon the Auric Hammer, and Angel Exterminatus from the Horus Heresy series. And for a more modern read, look into the Fabius Bile series, which I've only heard good things about. For the Black Legion, I've heard that the Black Legion series is really good, especially Talon of Horus. For Wordbearers, the First Heretic and Aurelian from the Horus Heresy series are both great reads. For the Iron Warriors, Storm of Iron and Perturabo Hammer of Olympia are both really good. And for the Alpha Legion, Alpharius, Head of the Hydra, and Legion are good reads too. So those are my recommendations for the trader books, but what about the Xenos of the setting? Well, this area is weird because they have been largely overlooked by Games Workshop, with them either having very few books or the books they do have just not being very good. But let's start with the best Xenos books, Necrons. The Necron books are so good, and I personally recommend The Infinite and the Divine and the two Twice Dead King books, as they give you a really good look into the Necrons as a group, and in the case of The Infinite and the Divine, it's just really funny. Next is Orcs, and I love Orc books. Despite them being mostly just fun to read, they're also pretty well written, and I've never not enjoyed one. War Boss, Brutal Cunning, and The Big Daco would be my recommendations personally. Next is Gene Stealer Cults, and from what I've heard, Day of Ascension and Cult of the Spiral Dawn are both really good. For Tyranids, they don't really have a book about themselves and are mostly just relegated to being bad guys in other players' books, but I'd recommend Devastation of Baal, and I guess the Gene Stealer books I listed would also count too. For Eldar, as you can probably imagine, I haven't read any of them, but I've heard that Ghost Warrior and Wild Rider are pretty good, and same with the Path of the Eldar series. For Drukhari, I've heard that the Path of the Dark Eldar books are pretty good, although I couldn't find any of them on Audible, so you may have to look around to find them. For Tau, most of them are written by Phil Kelly, and from what I understand, Tau players are not big fans of Phil Kelly and how he writes them, but it seems like the Farsight books and Elemental Council are pretty well received. And for Leagues of Votann, it's an easy choice because you really only have one book, The High Call's Oath, and I've heard pretty good things about it. Other than that, you really only have your codex, which brings up a good point. How do the codexes fit into all this? Well, codexes are unique as they aren't like novels that follow set stories, but rather they act as an overall lore and art book for your faction. So for factions like, say, the Votann, they're pretty much required reading as it's the source of like half your lore. But for Space Marines, which have a ton of books, they'll mostly act as a surface level introduction on their lore. They also are used as rulebooks for the tabletop game, but you can typically find rules online for free. So overall, if you're interested in a codex, by all means pick it up. Just don't expect a story like a normal novel. So with all that said, if I had to give a newbie 5 books to read, here's what I'd give them. Horus Rising, a great introduction to the Imperium with fun characters and great writing. The Infinite and the Divine, a really fun look into the Necrons and a great way of establishing just how old they are and just how ancient the setting actually is. Betrayer, a fantastic look into the motivations of some of the traitor legions and into the mind of one of the most tragic characters in the setting. Brutal Cunning, a great introduction to the orcs and a great way of conveying just how goofy but still cool 40k can be sometimes. And Dark Imperium, as a look into the current state of affairs of the Imperium. But that's just what I think. There's so many 40k books out there, and I've only read a percentage of them, so I'm sure there's stuff I missed. But whatever you start with, the important thing is that you read what you enjoy. So get out there and start learning about the grimdark future. What do y'all think are the best 40k books? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, y'all. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let me know if there's any questions you have that I can help answer. Be sure to check out my community tab where I post memes and run polls from time to time. And with all that said, you have a great day, and I'll see y'all later.